Now, you can hang with this guy on January 27th and learn a lot. But he's only here for about 30 minutes, and then he's going to be in the lobby for you to ask questions. But please welcome, from Light Iron, here in Hollywood, Michael Cioni.
Thanks. The funny thing with Muppets is, I'm not joking, it was a movie where nobody got upset. There was never a moment where people were unhappy on that film. That never happened. So, again, I'm Michael Cioni. Thanks for having me out here. I see a lot of friendly faces, a lot of people that I've known over the years. And interestingly enough, although I tend to get associated with Red quite a bit because I am a fan of their tools, I actually came out to Los Angeles in September of 2001, and with a bunch of friends of mine that I'm still very close with, and many of them still work with me. And it was in 1999 that we got Final Cut 1, and we started toying with that. And my whole career basically started with the summer in which, if you remember, a long time ago, Final Cut 1, the G4, the Sony DSR series, as we know as DV Cam, and Firewire all came out at the same time. Was that planned? Probably. But that was an opportunity that I saw in sort of my collegiate years to kind of take advantage of. And that's really what springboarded the idea of digital cinema for me and my friends. We always assumed that the shortcomings and the controversy and even the heretic sort of ideals of digital cinema, which to some people seems like an oxymoron, we assumed would start to dissipate because it was something that we knew every time someone could criticize the format, the form, the factor, all those things about D-cinema, we knew that if we met again, it would improve by the next time we saw each other. And I didn't know that it would take more than 14 years to sort of get to that point where, you know, I remember reading articles that you can still find where when 3/4 inch came out, people were like, oh, film is so dead. Oh my gosh, look out. Like they really thought that. In every single format, people had that reaction. But the truth is, I know I'm on camera. I think we're finally there, maybe. We're really close to that. There's always been exceptions in digital cinema, but we're finally starting to see the rule emerge, and the exceptions becomes the more traditionalistic approach to this. What I'm going to talk about this evening is Michael asked me to speak about The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and some of the components that I think are special about the film, but applicable to people here, because it really is applicable. So before you think I'm getting too technical, which is there's a moment where you're all starting to think that, and some of you it's already passed. And basically, before you think I'm getting too technical, I want you to think about this. Expanded knowledge in fields that closely border your profession enables you to take advantage of a larger base. Apply that larger base to problems that you've never encountered. This is a strategy that I really, truly live by. I endorse some of the things Sean was saying. Actually, really makes a lot of sense, because the idea is you need to expand your knowledge in fields that closely border you. It's so critical, because problem solving is not about solving problems that you know how to solve. That's not really problem solving. That's easy. You can do that in the dark. Problem solving is taking information that you've learned and applying it to problems that you've never encountered before. That's what real problem solving is. And people that are good at that have value. People that have value do well. People that are bad at that they struggle more. So that's kind of what this is about. So before you feel this is too technical or this doesn't apply to you because you didn't work on this film, that's the type of stuff you need to forget about. You need to think about the aspects that do apply, and then you use that and move forward. Does that make sense? Can we do that? Yeah. Okay, so just for some of the statistical type people that just sort of like your stats, this is like your sort of Denver, New England statistics page. This is where all the different people's numbers come up. So I know some people kind of like the stats. This is some information about the film that is sort of noteworthy. But there's a couple components that I wanted to highlight that I think are some of the most important. First of all, this was edited in Final Cut Pro 7 using ProRes LT files. I know there's a lot of confusion out there about how much percentage of Final Cut versus Avid and even versus Premiere is out there, but it's being used, and Final Cut knows no boundaries as to budgets or qualitative concerns or it's just a tool. As Michael said, we sort of celebrate every tool, and there's really no reason you can't use one tool over another. So this was a Final Cut Pro 7 tool. The next thing that I think is almost the most important of the information on this list is this film was conformed using Adobe CS 5.5. Now the word conform is the process of taking those ProRes LT files and relinking them to original full res files. Now normally, most of you have experience with either A, not doing that process at all, that's common, that's okay, or B, somebody else does that process for you, right? It's usually A or B. Well, in this case, Mr. Fincher is someone who's a major, he celebrates the idea of teamwork. And when Sean was talking about using a team, I totally stand by that. David has a very small team, and that team he trusts very, very well, very, very much, and they do a lot of things internal. In fact, they do tons of internal. When you see a credit scroll go by with, 2,000 names in it, and I sometimes look at that, I'm like, there's 45 people made this movie. Who are all these people, Like, you ever had that feeling when you type your own credit scrolls, And you're like, who are all these people, But that's just kind of the nature of it. There's a core group of people that do 90% of the work, right? And that core group of people is the team that in this case was able to even conform the movie themselves, go all the way back to the highest res files, in this case were 5K, and conform them, preparing it for finishing. And they did that in Adobe using a transform of XML from Final Cut into Premiere, and then sending Premiere, crossing it into After Effects. And that's a very logical step that you can process footage through. And once you're in After Effects, everybody pretty much knows the sky's the limit, right? And that's the After Effects can usually outsmart you, so if you've got a head on your shoulders, you can probably get it to do what you want it to do. And the last thing that's really critical is this film was done with 4K all the way through. We actually delivered and mastered and released this film in 4K, which is really important because 4K is new. 4K is not something that we have in the distribution world. We have had it in the acquisition world for a little over 4 years, but we've never had it in the exhibition world. And that's critical, is that we're finally starting to see the exhibition potential of 4K. And that's really, really remarkable and poignant. So that's kind of that. But there are some, we would say, side effects to something like this. There's side effects to working with these types of files. For example, if you're dealing with 5K and 4K files, the first thing to think about, that's 45 megabytes per frame. This is the type of stuff that when you wake up and you're like worried, I wake up and I see like megabytes and gigabytes. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'll be brushing my teeth and that'll just pop in my head. Oh, jeez. So just to give you an example, for those of you who are trying to do the arithmetic in your head, 45 megabytes per frame is the equivalent of 1.1 gigabytes per second, right? How fast is your drive again, right? 1.1 gigabytes per second is the equivalent of 4 terabytes per hour. Someone here said they had their entire project marched down into 3 terabytes, I heard. And I was like, oh, I wish, right? There was a time. But this is going to be your problem someday. It's coming up. You can sense it, right? All right. And then that's the equivalent of 12 terabytes of source material. So when we conform the movie into the final movie, it's about 12 terabytes. And then once we get the visual effects and render the results, because you have to color it, and then you have to render it, and you got to put those title scrolls and all that crap in there, you end up with about 55 terabytes. That's just the movie. That's not the dailies. That's not the DVD version. That's just the finished movie that you sit and hit play. And imagine that every time you hit play, every second is a gig, a gig, a gig, a gig. That's the type of data that you're dealing with. But this is the type of thing that I'll take some arrows for. I don't mind doing that. I've been doing that a while. But it's important that people start thinking about it on their own, because this is coming your way, right? There's an epicenter, like throwing a rock into a lake, and eventually those ripples are going to hit everybody, right? Eventually they hit junior high students, eventually, okay? But today, there's an epicenter, and you're somewhere between me and the junior high student, all right? And you got to figure out where you are. All right, moving on. So as we move on, I'm going to start with a technological given. This sort of makes perfect sense. It's a technological given. This is important because I want to show what we're really dealing with here on a macro level. So the technological given is that developments in camera and post technologies are always enhancing the process. That's a given. That shouldn't be a shock to anybody here, right? We're enhancing the process. But I'm talking about something different here. Let me give you an example of what a transition is. Because a lot of people will say, we're in a transition. You ever heard that phrase? I think it was spoken tonight, sort of flippantly. Like it's a transition process. But this is not a transition. And I want to tell you exactly why. Here are a couple transitions. 2K scan to 4K scan. Technology improves, image enhances. Very logical, right? Or standard def to HD. Technology improves, image enhances, and you have a transition from standard def to HD. Or Blu-ray from DVD, right? These are transitions. The reason they're transitions is because they're logical and they're simple. Switching from standard def to high def didn't require everyone to basically reinvent the wheel. Switching from your DVD to Blu-ray just seems logical. You're like, oh, this is better, right? You didn't have to, reinvent the wheel. It's not that radical. But what we're going through now is not a transition. People that say switching to high-resolution, raw image capture is just another transition are wrong. It's not a transition. It's a transformation. This is as different from film as videotape is from film. This is not just the next iteration of the digital umbrella. That's not what this is. This is transformative, and it is it can never change back, and it's that significant. This is not just something like standard def to high def. This is something very different. So here's what a technological transformation sort of looks like. I finally found a use for that filter, actually. I'm proud of that one. I know. So we're paving the way for an entirely new domain of potential. That's really what it is. This is extremely liberating. File-based digital cinema is the most liberating thing. And we thought that mini DV was liberating in 1998. You remember how liberating that was, right? It really was, for those of us that were there. It was super liberating. But it pales in comparison to what we have now and where we're going with it and what we can actually do. Okay? So these are the three things I'm going to talk about tonight. Increased source fidelity, increased tool performance, and increased exhibition fidelity. These are the critical components. These are just a few that I picked for this group tonight that are really critical in this transforming our arena that we're in. So the first thing we're going to start with is increased source fidelity. 5K for 4K. This is a phrase that I don't know who came up with it. I don't know if I came up with it. But it's a process that allows us to start with the oversampling. Now, oversampling of an image is super simple and super practical, and we all used to do it. Do you realize that when we used to shoot film, because that was the only thing we could shoot in a sort of single camera narrative presentation, we didn't actually print everything we shot in terms of the frames. Does everyone remember that? Right? You had a framing chart, and you would always cut off some portion of the film. Isn't that ridiculous that we just threw that away? Because nobody shooting HD video would subsample their picture. Right? No one would shoot HD and frame for standard definition. That doesn't make any sense, right? And because there were so few pixels in HD that we needed every single pixel they gave us. But when you shot film, you would oversample 10%, 20%, 30%, and you'd carve off 30% of the picture all the time. That was normal. They changed aspect ratios, right? All the time. Well, we finally have cameras that allow us to go back to that, which means we can photograph pictures larger than we intend to distribute. This has never happened in digital cinema before. This is a major change. So this is the actual Dragon Tattoo framing chart. If you look very closely in the upper right, this file, this is the actual framing chart, it is 5120 by 2560. This frame, shot with the Red Epic camera, is 35% larger vertically than high definition is horizontally. Okay? It's a massive difference. It's so big that we can actually afford to subsample this picture and actually frame a 4K picture well inside of the 5K. And that was the idea here. The idea is to frame for 4K through the viewfinder. So that's what you're seeing, but you're actually capturing this 5K look-around space, which is 20%. There's actually about 6 megapixels of space to play with in this frame.
So you could do digital zooms and...
You can do digital zooms, you can do stabilization,
Yes.
and you can, this is one of the most common things that David did to the tune of multiple hundreds of shots that were stitched together. Takes that worked with one actor and another actor that were different takes. Instead of having to choose the best take, you choose the best performance, and you sew them together later because you have 20% space to reposition the camera because the camera framing is close but not exact. And this allows you to do that without having to zoom in and lose information. So we're talking about a major undertaking in terms of the ability for an edit room to have all this wiggle room to do this. Here's kind of an example with some frames. This is really dark, but we'll deal with it. Basically, we have a frame from the film here.
We could change that and make it a bit brighter
If you want to go for it, let's do it.
You have to go in your system preferences displays, go down to color, 2.1.
Yeah, never mind. What we're going to do instead is take my word for it. What we've got here is a 5K frame, and you can see the name of the shop and all that type of stuff here. And then what we've got is the 4K center extraction. So this is considered a center extraction type of photography technique. Now, this has been used in the past. We're just finally readapting it to D-Cinema. So if we look at this, this is a 240 extraction. So you can see the names cut off and the image changes shape quite a bit. But because it's so big, when we go to our DVD and Blu-ray versions, we have all that resolution to reuse again. So if I put these all together, you can see across from each other, it starts with a full 5K full frame image. It's a 1:8:9 aspect ratio. That's about 13 megapixels. Then that boils down to the center extraction to about 5.5 megapixels. And it's basically the same width, but of course in an Academy aperture, which this film is, they've cut the top and bottom off. But what's great about this format, because it's so large, is that when we go to the 16:9 versions, we have the resolution to do it. So we can remove the masking from the Academy version, and we have the top and bottom. So it's about 9 megapixels for the Blu-ray. So the Blu-ray actually has more resolution at its source when we're doing the film than the Academy release. But it means we don't have to blow it up, and we have the ability to reposition everything. So we can reframe to our heart's desire without having basically any trade-off. Does that make sense? Okay, we can pull the lights back up. All right, number 2, increased tool performance. 4K footprints is what we'll call this one. 4K footprints is super, super exciting. I am really excited about this, and this is a really important component, and this is where I want people to get more inspired than get afraid. So let's look at it that way. These are the basic tools used to make this whole film work in the post-production process. We've got Final Cut. We've got Red Cine X, which was a free program used to render the red files. We've got Final Cut. We've got Premiere and After Effects from the Adobe CS5 family. We've got Quantel, and we've got a company called DVS. Most people don't know what DVS is. It's a German company. It's actually one of the best file-based manipulation companies. You remember, I think it was Michael was mentioning compressor, the new compressor, which you can get for $50, and it's sort of more optimized for transcode acceleration, which is absolutely true. DVS makes a box called the Clipster, and the Clipster is basically I don't know how to describe it, but it's basically a machine that just vomits data. It will take anything, and it will barf out whatever you want faster than you could possibly want it. It's really out of control. It is what we call, sometimes in the industry, a supercomputer. For an example, if you gave the Clipster an HD frame, and you wanted to export that to like an iTunes file that would go on iTunes, let's say a 2-hour movie, If you gave it to Clipster and said, take this uncompressed 2K movie and make it iTunes ready, it would probably do that about 200 frames per second. It would be so fast you couldn't watch it. It would take about 15 minutes to do a 2-hour movie, and it just spits it right out.
This is a box.
It's a computer.
Yeah.
It's a supercomputer, yeah. So that's one of the ways in which we make all these files, and we sort of do all these versions, and we just got to, spit it out really fast because it's so optimized for this type of stuff. Clipsters, for those of you that have or worked with or know about HD cam decks, this is the HD cam SR deck for data because we don't have one, right? We don't have decks anymore. We have compressor and episode. We need something a little bit more beefy, and that's what a Clipster does. But what's remarkable about this is that this infrastructure, think about the size of this footprint. This footprint is tiny. For a major motion picture, it's 158 minutes, it's 4K, it's 55 terabytes, and it only takes a handful of tools to do that. And most of these tools you guys have on your laptops that you brought and you're using right now instead of listening. Like, that's happening right now. It's incredible. It's remarkable. So what we've got here is a workflow that is super achievable. Now, I know people don't have Quantel Pablos and Clipsters lying around, but there are components that you can substitute with that, and you can use those instead. There's nothing wrong with using compressor or episode or using Resolve Light or something like that, or color. Like, that makes the same sense. It's just going to change the speed, right? So here's the workflow. Kind of give you an idea about this. So start on the very far left. On the very far left, you have your acquisition. This movie was shot on 2 cameras. It was shot on the Red MX at 4K and the Epic at 5K. That's basically your acquisition format. In 4K, you're shooting Red Code 42, and in 5K, you're shooting Red Code 5:1, which was about 20% larger in data footprint than Red, if you're not familiar with Epic. Then these files go through a transcoding process. When they're transcoded, they're basically graded for offline. They have a temporary color correction on them, and they're rendered out as ProRes files. But the ProRes files are rendered out twice. They're rendered out once as a ProRes file and another time as an H.264. This is a great technique that everyone should do. If you are ever rendering anything, render it twice. If you're ever rendering anything, render it twice. Make yourself a proxy version. Most of the systems that you submit to render queues for can transcode to multiple flavors. Most of us just pick the main flavor we're going to go to. But that main flavor is usually optimized for editing and not optimized for anything else. But as much streaming and cloud-based distribution we have now, and the amount of iPads and iPhones and things like that out there, we actually, for our independent films, we use iTunes as our daily streaming device because it's free. Because everybody's got iTunes, and it doesn't care if it's on a Mac or a PC. You can podcast dailies. Apple doesn't care. They got plenty of space. And they just want you to use iTunes because if you're podcasting dailies, you're going to buy a Beatles song. Everybody knows that. So basically, render out an H.264 720p at 1.5 megabits a second. 1.5 megabits, not megabytes, megabits. You render that out, and your computer will chew through that real quick, and then it'll do the ProRes also. And some computers can do those at the same time. Actually, most computers can. You just use 2 programs to do it. Remember he said episode and compressor? Well, what a great idea if you use episode to do one and compressor to do the other at the same time. Whoa. Like, you could do that stuff. Computers are dumb. They don't know. So you end up with these ProRes and these H.264 files. The H.264s, because the movie was shot overseas, were streamed back to Los Angeles, and the editor was able to watch the dailies on the same day, even though they were shooting in Sweden, and then it would take a day or 2 for the ProRes to show up in the mail. So the editor was never waiting for dailies. They always had them. They just had a proxy version with the same name and the same time code, and they just switched it out later. One that could be streamed across the web while they waited for the big one to be mailed. Does that make sense? Pretty easy. Pretty low tech when you think about it, you know? Okay, you edit in Final Cut Pro 7, then we cut this movie, which takes, it's really easy. It takes about 9.5 months. No big deal. 4 million feet of film, equivalent to that, something like that. And then they go to Premiere. And the assistant editor, Tyler Nelson, who's just an incredible individual who has been extremely influential in those of you that use any Adobe product, Tyler's paws are all over it. You're getting the benefits of one of the smartest young minds in the post-production industry, and they're pumping Tyler buttons all over this Adobe Creative Suite. So it's great. We all win when Tyler has a good idea. I mean that. And basically with CS 5.5, Tyler was able to take the original red files, take the ProRes files, switch them out for red files, and then transform that to uncompressed. Okay? So it starts as a ProRes, Premiere switches it for a red file, and then that red file can be transcoded to uncompressed. And that's how you do it. So you're basically reconstructing your cut list so that you can make an uncompressed file. If Final Cut just did this, we would just do it in Final Cut. Okay? But Final Cut doesn't do this, so we have to play this Adobe hopscotch. Okay? That's why this is. Then all the VFX are sent out as uncompressed files to all the vendors. There's maybe 1,200 visual effects shots in the movie. Did you see them? No. But they were there. That movie was about half visual effects. And then we go into color. And when we color it, we color correct in the flavor red log film because we want to take the files which are in gamma corrected space. They look like nice gamma friendly files that look good, but we want to actually flatten them out and make them look really milky so that we have more dynamic range. And the curve that red gives you to do that is called red log film, which everybody can have in that program on the left, Red Cine X. It's just a setting to turn your curve. So then we grade that. We actually grade in P3 space. If you're not familiar with that, when you're working in high definition, the color space is considered, the standard for that is considered 709. You've probably heard 709. 709 is a triangle, and it's a triangle in which colors fall into, and it's sort of like a boundary zone, sort of like prisoners that aren't allowed to go outside the courtyard. That's sort of what it is. Essentially, HDTV, in order to protect you from having too much, your brains would explode. They've limited the color opportunities for colors. They can't go too far out of control, or else I don't know what would happen to us. We might get cancer or something. But they basically limited it all down, making it easier for manufacturers to make panels and to basically have a standard for something like that. But when you have a movie, all those rules kind of go out. Nobody cares anymore for some reason. So if you have a movie, you can take that triangle and you can expand it out, and that's called P3 space, which is a space in which we can produce colors digitally that you're not allowed or cannot produce for HD television. Does that make sense? It goes beyond what an HD TV is capable of displaying. It also allows you to work with, we would say, a little bit more precision because you have more shades of gray, so to speak. Now, the difference between HD TV and P3, can you really see the difference? Not really, because I think our brains sort of translate what we're looking at every time we're looking at it. That's why when you look at your phone, you see a good picture, you're like, that looks awesome. But if you saw that phone picture projected on a 45-foot screen, you'd be like, that looks like butt, right? So how does that happen, right? Well, it happens because your brain translates this, It's sort of relative to the format. So P3 allows us to kind of get the most for your money in the theater, and then we knock it down to 709 for the Blu-ray, okay? So that's why we start with P3. We do that in what we call linear grade, and linear is a key word here because you're not going to see a word up there that is one of my least favorite words, and that is the word LUT. Anyone heard the word LUT before? Well, maybe I'm a heretic to some of you, but the fact of the matter is I really think LUTs are just limiters and boundaries, and they have a very low ceiling. And when you abide by the rules of LUTs, you're literally twisting, and to me it's like taking this piece of paper, and if I folded this piece of paper in half and then creased it down and then said, opened it up and then gave it to you and said, here's a brand new piece of paper, you'd be like, I mean, it's not brand new, and I'm sure it is. And this is kind of what a LUT is to me. It's a transition, it's a change, it's an effect on a picture that's almost insignificant, but it's not quite perfect anymore. And that's sort of what LUTs can do in a very simple metaphor. So what we've got here is a workflow that does not involve any LUTs. We actually grade gamma corrected, so we're not using film LUTs or any of that stuff, because that's really not what this format wants. It wants to be itself. And what is it? It's a linear file, so we just let it be what it is. So that's kind of how we do that. Then we render out of Clipster our DPX files, which are gamma encoded, meaning there's no LUTs, there's no transform. It just is what it is. What we saw on the projector is what we delivered. There's no secret sauce, there's no conversion, there's no special glasses you have to wear to look at it right. It just is what it is, right? And then we master it out to a DCP, the digital cinema package format, a film print, which I don't make, and a tape, because it is a Sony movie, so we made a lot of tapes for some reason. And Blu-ray. Also, Sony tends to favor the Blu-rays, obviously. So those are kind of the components we have. Now, what that gets down to is, thank you. What it gets down to right here is a picture of the actual machine room in which we did some of this stuff. This is just a picture of a machine room, and it's just, I know this looks crazy. It's not crazy. Don't give me that. Like, it's not that crazy. Like, it's just a few computers here, you know? It's really not that much stuff in order to do something this substantial. We've got battery. Half of that's batteries, guys. Don't even worry about it. Okay, the last thing, I got a minute and a half here. The last thing is 4K audiences. And this is really critical because we're finally getting into that exhibition state where we have 4K audiences. Thanks to CES last week, and I'm glad this timed out with CES, because CES saw an incredible change. This is the new 3D. 4K is the new 3D. And that was clear because the Consumer Electronics Show, basically 10 companies started showcasing all of their 4K display technologies. And we're seeing that basically it's going to be this astronomical adjustment. It's going to actually pave the way for essentially the beginning of the collapse of broadcast television. We'll talk about that later. And it's basically going to be a massive, massive shift. And 4K is going to be great. And these are just a few companies that are really pushing 4K. And we're talking 4K that some of these panels are measured in feet, not inches, right? That's serious 4K. So these are some points that I want to leave you with today. The first point, passive storage data throughput needs to be large. That means the footage that you're not really using all that much, your dailies, you obviously need to have 3 terabyte drives that are a bunch of those. That's going to have to be large. But if you want to push these 4K files when it's active, the high quality finishing stuff, you need drives that are small. People forget about that. They think, I need to push data really fast. What's the biggest drive I can get? Wrong. What's the smallest drive you can get? Smaller drives are faster. You just need more of them. So if it's small, it can spin faster and there's less data on it, so the needle doesn't have to search around as much, so it can spin faster, so you have faster accessibility to it. And you just need to have more of them. But if you want to move fast, don't buy big drives, buy small ones. Interesting, huh? Okay, number 3, color science is less film dependent and more web dependent. I'm more concerned about how things look in digital delivery, such as web-based and stuff like that, than I am on a film print. So don't get all hung up on the color science of a film print. Everybody's always worried about that. I'm like, why are you so worried about that? Film what? Standardized source resolutions and aspect ratios will disappear. You remember the 5K for 4K? Standard aspect ratios and standard resolutions will go away. Someone was talking about they're having trouble with 1080 and 720 and 60. It's not going to be 1080 and 720. There's going to be any aspect ratio you want. And that's kind of good in a way because you have creative freedom. And lastly, you need to prepare for customized geometric monitoring. Customized geometric monitoring means you need to have ways in which to monitor aspect ratios that do not exist as presets, right? Because you're going to make up these aspect ratios, so you need to be able to do that. So I really appreciate the time that I had here today. This was what I started out with. Expanded knowledge in fields that are closely border your profession enables you to take advantage of a larger base to apply to problems you've never encountered before. That's the whole point. Hopefully some of this information gets you thinking about that, and you're just a little bit more exposed to this stuff so you can apply it. So my name is Michael Cioni, and I appreciate the time this evening. Thank you.